Hey, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Derek Main. I should probably dress or put some sort of effort into the appearance, but this is what I look like. We are in the midst of the longest winter, and yeah, this is how it has to be. So anyway, today I'm going to talk briefly about The Easy Chain by Dara, which I just finished and I love. I've been reading it really slowly because it was such a joy to read. So I read it really over the course of the past month, probably. Always came to it in the evenings, and it was just sort of the last thing before I'd go to sleep that I would inhale, and some nights would leave me up well past when I should be awake. But it kind of, so I have a review, and I'm going to link because I'm going to talk about a couple other reviews I've done before. I have a review of The Lost Scrapbook, which is Evan Dara's first an initial novel, I think from '93, that won the FC2 prize, put him on the map. But the literary map, and a small one that it is. It is not. This is, a fairly unknown author, I guess. And of course, Evan Dara is a pen name. We don't know. The only description we have is an American writer living in Paris. As I mentioned in my Lost Scrapbook review, there's one correspondence for sure that we know of, I think, with Stephen Moore, the critic, and Gaddis scholar, who reached out specifically about the question of Gaddis's influence. I believe the question was about J.R. And the unattributed dialogue influence with parts of the Lost Scrapbook. And I said this in their review, but real quick, Evan Dara apparently wrote back in an email and just said, I checked it out of the Paris library, or this French library once, opened it up, read the first page, closed it, didn't want the influence. Okay, so that is the only interaction that we have, and I'm not sure how Stephen Moore found Evan Dara, whatnot. But Evan Dara does run his own press, Aurora, which is what Easy Chain, and then the most recent one from I think 2013, Flee, which I have, and I'll read next. And then he has a play as well that was, I think, released as just like a PDF play, and that is more recent. Well, anyway, so those are his works. That's his oeuvre. That's his oeuvre. And I think that you're going to see a lot of the joy of discovering with Dara and stuff in my Lost Scrapbook reviews. So if you're really interested in Dara, I'd love for you to check that one out. Easy Chain, I kind of ran into. I loved it. Okay, I loved it. But I ran into an issue when I thought about talking about it, which is the real joy of discovery in this particular work of what I think this is experimental literary fiction. Okay, so this particular work of experimental literary fiction, and it's the ocean that Dara swims in, is very difficult to do any sort of summation of without giving away that joy of discovery. Okay, so here's the best I can do for a description. The Easy Chain in the first, so this is about 500 pages. The first, I think, 250 or so, about the first 200, is primarily unattributed back and forth dialogue, almost as if you, the reader, are walking through a party, an event, and everyone's talking about the same thing. Everyone is talking about Lincoln Selwyn, a young British man from Amsterdam, but he is British, who comes to Chicago and sets the city on fire. He sets the city ablaze, or some of the actual words or terms. And he is a fabulous ladies' man and businessman. He makes lots of money. He woos everyone. He goes to parties and receptions. He just really takes over the city and is this sort of bright, shining star. Everyone has this magnetism that everyone is really drawn to. And the descriptions, as you're, again, I don't know where the reader necessarily should imagine themselves in physical space as you're reading that first 200 pages, but for me, it helped center me to really think of kind of walking through a room of all these people discussing him and various people, and they're kind of comparing stories, and it's really a mythology. You know, they're building up this mythology. Well, so that's the first 200 pages. A lot of fun to read, great descriptions, and then there's a section here. You know, it starts to get a little choppy, okay, with the dialogue. I don't know how we can read that, but pretty choppy. And then we get to this middle section where empty pages there. Okay, so I was talking about the better face of fascism last time, the last video I made by Bibles, and I was talking to the author of that work about that work because I was so giddily, you know, I loved it, as you can tell from my review. And one of the things he talked about was with his method, because he writes at least the drafts in real time that you could actually follow. I mean, you know, so it's on a platform where he is creating his fiction and his work in real time. Well, anyway, one of the things he talked about is the nice thing about the platform was there would be these breaks. So, and I hope I'm not talking out of school by mentioning this sort of side conversation with another author, but it does get to something I want to say about the Easy Chain. So what Bibles was saying was that the medium of that particular platform like gave time and space for there to be silence and breaks between transmissions, if you will, okay? And speaking real quick of transmissions, I mean, remember I said the Lost Scrapbook had an FM or AM radio dial feel to it up until about page 300 or so, where for the last 180 or so pages, it brings it all together. And we're gonna come back to that concept. And that's primarily what today's video is gonna be about. But so in text, that's very difficult to do. And I believe that is what Dara set out to do with this section here. I mean, obviously it's a clear delineation and it's not all totally blank, but it gives you, as the reader, it tells you to take a step aside for a moment. And then when we come back to the text, we're in a different world. And we're still hearing some side conversations, although they are now much more nefarious, and they are not hagiography or anything like that, as it was the mythologizing in the beginning. And then we have a reporter who is also emailing people, and the emails are in there trying to get a handle on this story of the rise and then ultimately untimely and mysterious disappearance of Lincoln Swellen. And so therein is our conflict, our mystery, and the excitement and thrill as you really start to pour through the format, the way this story is told, but also you want to know what happened to him. Dara did such a great job in the first couple hundred pages, like whetting our appetite for this character who is never front and center as a self, you know, always being described by others. In other words, you know, we're not in his Lincoln's consciousness. But then to flip and become kind of a mystery about, you know, where he went off to, what happened. Just an incredible work. I loved it. You know, it's kind of hard. I was trying to think if this was better than Lost Scrapbook, and in fact, I just don't like those words, so I'm not going to use them. They are different, and I think they are both very, very good. Lost Scrapbook, you can see the the experimental elements that he's working on, and you see it sort of, it's more novel, right? Because it's the first time that I read him and it's his first book. There's something quite tighter about the Easy Chain in technical craft, okay? And so then it becomes just a preference thing. Some people really like to see an author working and like to see an author's growth sort of trajectory. And in that case, I think you do start with Lost Scrapbook, and I think you do sort of enjoy seeing it, develop into this full-grown thing. But perhaps the Easy Chain is again technically just from a sort of structure meets plot standpoint, a little bit tighter, a little bit stronger. So those are my words on on the Easy Chain. But I did want to, I kind of mentioned it briefly a minute ago about the Lost Scrapbook, and that was I'm trying to always get at what it is about experimental text that works when it works, because I read a lot of them, and I mean, truthfully, in 85 to 90% of them do not work for me, and I hate them, okay? And I'll end up going back to my crime noirs or, sort of translated literature I know I love, like the Injai is coming up. My heart hemmed in, I mean, my style. I mean, I need to read the Clerk. I'm just sitting next to my shelf, so I got to pull out some. I need to read the Clerk from Open Letter by Guillermo Sakamoto. The Clerk is translated by Andrea Labinger, his longtime translator, and Injai is translated by Jordan Stump, her longtime translator. Anyway, so I when I get to those phases where I read a couple of experimental or contemporary texts in a row that just like don't work, that's what I'm drawn to, is more of that, still literary, obviously both those things, but, more of a plot, I guess, more of a sort of a traditional, like, this is a great story. Well, what does work for me, though, is that thing where a switch flips in the text and you start to see that the work, either in structure or how the story is told, that the author is doing, is not experimental just for experimental's sake, but it serves the purpose of the narrative. That's when it works 100% for me. I've said this before, but it's worth repeating that the best example of this is from Dalkey Archive. We've got Wittgenstein's Mistress by David Markson. And I love David Markson in total, but this is the one that I think is the best example of that, and that's because I am probably tend more towards the sentimental, and this is the most sentimental of his works. So I started to think about some books that I have that do those things and just wanted to talk about them. One author that does it very well is Young Moon. I have, I know I have a video of this, reviewing this. I think I might for Vaseline Buddha as well, for both. These are both deep vellum titles. Young Moon is a Korean author. Vaseline Buddha, his first deep vellum title here, translated from the Korean by Yi Wajung, and then his second from this year, Seven Samurai Swept Away in a River, also translated by Yi Wajung. And these are very stream of consciousness, to the point of, Caesar Arya says he works like where if he writes himself into a corner, he has to paint himself out for the plot. Young Moon, kind of working like that, but very much more interior monologue, like he in Seven Samurai. And I'm not going to go into the whole big thing for all these because I have reviews on these two. But he is a Korean author. I'm doing a book tour in Texas. Deep Vellum is in Texas. He is a Korean. So it's more on the auto fiction, but it is so internal. And the thing you really have to understand the addictive stream of consciousness that Moon does. What makes it work, and that switch that flips for me, is a connection to an Eastern idea of perhaps not Buddhism, perhaps not Zen, but that being in the moment and presence, and how that might change our work as writers. And so that's how experimentally these work for me, is they take on, this one has Buddha in the title, samurai, both of these are extremely at least to me, the images of a Buddha, of a samurai, are very staid, calm, but very present in the moment symbols. And so the fact that the text does that makes the experiment that he's doing textually really work. The fact that the narrative sort of demands it. That's the best way to put it. The most famous example, and probably my craziest review, if you've never watched it, back in April when lockdown was first kind of going on, I did a room by room in my house, weird ass thing with Parek's Life, a user's manual. And I think that's probably one of the better examples of what I'm talking about, where there's an extremely complicated structure, but at the very end, sort of the last puzzle piece to put it all together, makes that structure feel, again, necessary for the text, like it demanded it. How could you have done it otherwise without that experimentation? And the last two I'm going to talk about are two titles from Inside the Castle, which is perhaps the leading, I would say, experimental publishing house in America right now, for one type of experiment, okay? Because I don't want to, there's other places that other houses that focus more on sort of the experiments with the voice, but Inside the Castle is much more experiments with the text itself and with the physical object as the book. You know, as a writer, it's like one of my favorite things is houses or presses that you love so much you would never publish in, right? Like, I would never send a submission to Inside the Castle because it's not how I write, right? It's not how I create. But, like, in a way, that's the stuff I want to read even more at times, you know? And I certainly, like, am drawn to it because it has this mystical, or that's not right, mythical, that's what I want to go to, mythical quality where, like, what is the alchemy that it takes to create this? Because it's just so far from my own process. Well, let's start with Parapotat by Grant Meyerhofer. Meyerhofer is one of my favorite contemporary authors. I think he's really, really good. And if you haven't read him, I recommend any and all. I think Works, which came out this year from 1111 Press, it collects a lot of his earlier either self-published or small press novellas, some stories, some like album linear notes that he did, you know, just kind of like puts them all together in one place. That's a pretty good place to start. I don't know that he would necessarily like me touting that, because sometimes a writer with their earlier works, it's kind of like you've moved on and you're past that. And I think his stuff is nowadays more experimental textually, but I like having that grounding in with Meyerhofer and with authors in general, to where you can start to see the work kind of come to blossom, kind of like we talked about I talked about with Lost Scrapbook into Easy Chain. Well, Parapotat's described kind of as an ambient memoir, and I think that's really accurate. I've read it twice, and you can see what I mean by the textual quality. I mean, it's beautiful, and it's crazy, okay? All the different typefaces, all the different stories within stories, essays within essays. Look at how crazy that is. It's a beautiful object, looks like a brick, literally, and the way that it, as an experimental text, serves the story is it flips the memoir genre on its head to really be more truthful and honest to the way we experience the world, which is not in a linear, clear, logical fashion. Instead, it is through tangents, and it is through little memory holes that then we go down, or rabbit holes. And there's a lot of nodding to other authors throughout this work. And so it is a memoir of a writer. And that is going to, you know, entice me, obviously, but not just a writer, someone in love with literature and someone in love with art and avant-garde art and experimental art, you know. So there's so many touchstones and things as you read it, and things that if you references that you immediately kind of want to go to, but what it does on the whole is you understand how this young writer was formed. And so that is the memoir aspect, is you see all these influences and threads and rabbit holes, and you get a sense of, this is how I got to where I am today. So again, the experimental nature, by the end, it kind of, you feel like it couldn't have been written any other way. It couldn't have been just a linear memoir. And the last one I'll mention is Plaidsplatz. Plaidsplatz is, I believe, Inside the Castle's first text, and it's from John Treffray, and I apologize if I'm saying that wrong, the architect and author who runs Inside the Castle. And you kind of have to, it's really tough to see, but each page has 3 equal paragraphs, you see, and then they're mirrored on the next page. It is about a Los Angeles, and I do say a Los Angeles on purpose there, but it is someone building the city, I think, within his mind as he is creating the text. So the experimental nature of that format throughout, and oftentimes things not connecting within a page, within a section, really makes sense when you think of it as, well, as I just said, him building the city in his mind. And when you combine that sort of architecture background, I think I don't know. That's how I loved it and experienced it. And so that's how I'm going to attack it. But I will just add this. Treffray himself is a theoretical writer, I would call him, or at least a theoretical reader. Very sort of steeped in, he has a theory, right, behind not just his work, but literature and all that. And it's not always a theory that I share. I don't mean that to be negative, but I just mean it to be frank and honest, that, the way that I, as the reader, experience Platz or any text is going to belong to me, as that is my experience, and it is not, once an author puts a physical object out into the world, it doesn't belong to them anymore, vis-a-vis interpretation. So anyway, yeah, that's my little rant. I'm not going to belabor about talking too much. I really just want to go through some of those books. Hope you got something out of it. I'm not in any way a expert or anything on, experimental literature. These are just some, books I read. I think most of them some of them were rereads this last year, but I think I've read everything that I said, within the last year. Something like Big Science Mistress, it would have been the 12th or 13th time I read it. But anyway, I'm still going. Wonder why. And again, apologize for the way I look. It's just the way I look. It's just the body that they gave me when I was at the body station. Thanks, guys. Be good to folks.